If it sounds too good to be true, then you'd best beware. Every day, people harm or take advantage of others in the most creative of ways. From internet scammers to crooked politicians to the Prince of Darkness himself this Halloween season, tricksters are constantly setting just nefarious traps in all sorts of unexpected places. Their mission is to take your money, take your time, take your ideas, your loyalty, and sometimes take your sanity, or so it might seem. Can you picture them now? Maybe stirring a bubbling cauldron and grinning over that latest ingenious recipe to cause harm. There's a psychological term for these harmful, novel acts of chaos, and it's our topic for today's episode. Malevolent creativity. Hello there, and happy Halloween! This is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and to better your life. Would you prefer to read along as you listen? A written transcript is available. See the link in the show notes for this episode. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Gayle Dow, Director of the Creative Research Lab in the College of Natural and Behavioral Sciences at Christopher Newport University. Dr. Dow received a PhD in Educational Psychology from Indiana University Bloomington. She teaches experimental design courses, statistics, educational psychology, cognitive psychology, creative and critical thinking, and this is what really got my attention. She also teaches the science of evil. Relevant to today's episode, she's published about the dark tetrad and malevolent creativity, and malevolent creativity does personality influence malicious divergent thinking. And I'll put links to both of those in the show notes in case you'd like to read more. I came across Dr. Dow's work via a recent Psi Chi Journal article that she published with student co-author Hannah Crawley. And when I got to looking at her lab website, I couldn't help inviting her on the show. Dr. Dow, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I think this is going to be a really fun, a wickedly fun episode, I should say.
Okay, hopefully not too evil.
Hopefully not. Could you tell us, to get us started, about a time when you witnessed or encountered malevolent creativity?
I think we can encounter it daily, just in small acts that you might have with a coworker if they try to sabotage you, or bigger acts that I personally remember, the horrific tragedy of September 11th, where terrorists used a plane or a series of planes as a bomb. And if you think about it, it's very creative to do that. But I always thought creativity is good. It's generating new ideas, it's art, it's music, it's scientific formulas. So I kind of grappled with that dilemma of how can something so horrific be creative? And I think the answer to that is malevolent creativity.
Could you share some of the characteristics of malevolent creativity and like any processes that occur?
Yeah, creativity just by itself is the process of generating an idea or product that is both novel and has value. To move into the area of malevolent creativity, we're going to add on that value is to cause harm or destruction. So it's generating a novel idea to hurt somebody.
Is there a profile of who might be most likely to commit a malevolent creative act?
Yeah, sort of yes and no. Creativity by itself, it's really difficult. It's kind of that enigma to measure and to figure out a profile of who's more likely to be creative. So when we move into the subfield of malevolent creativity, those problems still remain. Generally, what we can find is with the malevolent aspect, we see some personality attributes that are similar. So individuals that tend to be more antagonistic and more aggressive, both verbally and physically aggressive, are more likely to have malevolent ideas. And then when we look at the creativity part, it's often individuals that have strong imaginations, average to above average IQs, and are good problem solvers. So if you put those two together, you're going to have somebody who's antagonistic and a good problem solver. And that would foster malevolent creative ideas.
Is there also a profile for who's most likely to spring the trap, so to speak? The people to be harmed?
For the victims, I think that might be case specific depending on the perpetrator. So, for example, if it's a daily malevolent creativity being your next door neighbor, well, it's because you live next to them. So it's not anything per se about the victim or that person. It's just they're in that environment that put them on the radar for a perpetrator. Same thing with workplace sabotage. It's not necessarily the victim that's driving inspiration for those ideas. It's because they work in that environment next to or nearby somebody who has more malevolent ideations. And then with acts of terrorism, it's just, again, wrong place, wrong time. You just happen to be there where somebody is coming up with nefarious ideas to get their goals met or their needs met.
Now, does it count, technically speaking, as malevolent creativity if the person didn't have bad intentions, but then their idea, it had unexpected consequences?
That is a debate in the field, is do we have to have intention with this? So if you accidentally harm somebody in a creative way, is it still malevolent creativity? And different researchers theorize it different ways. I would argue that the intent has to be there, that's part of the goal, is to come up with an idea or a product that's novel, and the intent of it is to cause harm or destruction. So I'm more of the camp that the intention needs to be there.
I love what you said about how, creativity is often seen as this positive trait. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Since it can be used for evil, is that misleading view, maybe?
It's sort of a dichotomy, because creativity is often, creating and generating novel ideas. And usually those novel ideas are to help humanity or to help whatever problem we have in front of us in our living rooms or in our work environments. And so creativity is good. But when we look at this, it's like, well, the person engaged in the creative act, it's to solve a problem in their lives. So if they move into the world of wanting to cause harm or destruction, that's the value. So it's on that individual piece about what is the value. The value to them is to sabotage somebody. So to come up with a strategy to do that that's novel, that would be the malevolent creativity piece, because it's a novel behavior, but the intent is to cause harm.
Assuming that somebody knows what they're doing is wrong, or at least highly questionable, are there any common reasoning or excuses that they have that enable them to be able to do these things?
Absolutely. There's a variety of justifications people will put in place for wrong behavior. It might be that they think their end goals supersede anybody else's rights. And so they think they're in the right to engage in that behavior. Then we can move into some other, perhaps even more evil attributes where individuals enjoy harming others, and so they don't care. And we can look at those that have lower rates of empathy, that affective empathy, which allows us to care about somebody. If they have suppressed affective empathy, it gives them the free range to hurt somebody without any guilt or remorse or consequence from it. Then if you add in another personality attribute of sadism, they enjoy doing it. So if you get those two pieces together, the lack of affective empathy with sadism, it's very difficult to stop somebody from engaging in these acts. That's why, we have laws in place and consequences in place, because if there aren't any, they will just continue to engage in malevolent acts and malevolent creativity.
I guess it was a couple of days ago, my little boy was in his bedroom and he didn't hear me coming. And he had bent over to push one of the buttons on the top of an Alexa, on Echo, I guess is what it's called. And just as his finger was getting close to the top of the button, I was standing behind him and I went boop and scared the heck out of him. And it made my day. I think it maybe made his day. I don't know. We went running in there. We had to tell his mother about it. I think it made her day. We were all laughing about the boop that scared Hamilton so well. And so I like giving an unsuspecting family member like a good scare. And it got me wondering, as we approach Halloween, the season of tricks, can you think of any times when malevolent creativity is appropriate?
I would think that with Halloween coming up, one of the measures of malevolent creativity is a question that says, do you like to pull pranks on other people? And so pranks is sort of the origination of trick or treat. We give treats, but we forget about the trick part, which is where if the homeowner doesn't give you a piece of candy, the trick or treater is supposed to play a trick on them. And fortunately, we don't engage in that aspect of trick or treating. We just go for the candy. But the pranks and enjoying pranks is a form of malevolent creativity. The degree of harm it may cause, that's where it gets concerning. Because if it's a low level, everybody laughs, then yes, it's enjoyable, it's beneficial, it's a great activity. But if the person that's on the receiving end of that prank is not enjoying it, or it's hurting them either physically or emotionally, then it's getting more concerning because it's the person pulling the prank that thinks it's funny, not the person receiving it. So there's kind of a murky boundary about where is that level of appropriateness drawn.
Yeah, I kind of even wondered if when I told that example, if you would say, well, that's not technically malevolent creativity because everyone enjoyed it. I guess.
Yeah, and it's one of those with the definition. If the intent was to cause harm or destruction, we might say that no, that doesn't count. But if you're looking at pranks being as part of the definition, then yes, you would. And that is one of the biggest problems in creativity researcher is coming up with an agreed upon definition. And malevolent creativity is not immune from that problem either.
Do you like to pull pranks?
Not so much for Halloween. I like the candy more so. So I will, especially one of my favorite days is November 1st because it's half price candy day. And so that's more where I lean towards for the holiday season for Halloween.
Did you have anything you wanted to say about how did you become interested in this topic?
Oh, well, I've been a creativity researcher for decades, and it was watching the tragedy of September 11th that really, I think, started my thought process along that because I watched it and the thought that popped in my head when I saw the planes hit the Twin Towers was, that's awful. But then I was like, that's so creative. And I was just perplexed in my own thinking of how could I view that as creative? And so I just sort of sat in that discomfort for probably a few years until I got more involved in the research on malevolent behavior. And then I thought, okay, the malevolent behavior, the creativity, it's sort of coming together in my mind.
That example kind of resonates with me. I was, I think, 5th grade when that happened. And I remember the teacher turned the TV on because the announcer's speaker thing had said specifically, everyone leave your TVs off. So she turned it on to see, what is this? And we watched that second plane hit, and we all realized, like the whole class at one time realized this wasn't an accident,
Right.
And what is this?
It was intention. Yeah, the intention was behind it. Yeah.
And realizing that, like, I don't know, it was like a growing up moment where we realized, like, the bad guys aren't like on the cartoons, know. This is a whole different playing field what we're dealing with here, and that's always stuck with me.
Yeah. And it was so surprising. That's one of the elements of creativity is it can have an element of surprise because we haven't seen it before. And that's the creativity part. It's novel. That had never happened before. There've been acts of terrorism for centuries, but that particular use of a plane, we haven't seen that on that global scale before.
I know you've done research on this, so I wanted to ask, how does the study of malevolent creativity intersect with other psychological concepts like the dark tetrad?
So the dark tetrad, more commonly known as the dark triad, that is psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Then if you add in a fourth component of sadism, that's the dark tetrad. And I'm interested in those 4 areas to see how it impacts empathy, both the affective empathy and the cognitive empathy, which is understanding other people's thinking and desires and motivations, but then also how it impacts creativity and malevolent creativity. Generally, what we find is those that have narcissistic tendencies, these are non-clinical, so it's not narcissistic personality disorder, but just being on that sort of spectrum of having more narcissistic tendencies. Those individuals tend to be more creative. And we think the reason is that all 4 of these components of the dark tetrad struggle or have reduced levels of affective empathy, but they may have fully average or even above average cognitive empathy. So they don't care about other people, but they're able to know what their motivations are and what they're thinking. So they tend to be pretty good at manipulation. They can say what you want to hear in order to get their needs met. So that manipulative aspect. So with malevolent creativity, being able to convince somebody of your ideas and the merit of them, that's what we see is a talent for those that score higher on measures of narcissism. So they're able to convince others that their ideas are beneficial, that they're helpful, that they're great for that team project, even if they're not. And so they can use that manipulation in order to persuade others of their ideas. So that's the sort of one group out of the dark tetrad that tends to do better at malevolent creativity.
So these next couple questions are about prevention, or maybe just avoidance. So it seems like, if malevolent creativity is by definition new ideas for unethical purposes, it seems like it would be nearly impossible to catch or prevent these things, right? Because they'd be new. So do you have any ideas for how to spot malevolent creativity before you fall in the trap?
Yeah, that's sort of the $1 million question is if it's novel, it might not have ever happened before. So we're trying to predict something that hasn't happened that we don't know for sure will. Generally, what we do as researchers is we move into the world of regression. And regression is where you use another variable to predict one that hasn't happened yet. So we might take a series of variables such as personality and get measures of antagonism and aggression. And we can use that to therefore predict somebody has a higher predisposition to being malevolently creative with their ideas. So even though we don't have any data or any measures of their malevolent creativity, we're going to try to predict it. And that's where statistics and research methods can be a useful tool.
Do you have any suggestions for how to stay informed about emerging trends and tactics in malevolent creativity? I guess with spammers or things like that?
I would say the one piece that can fall into being aware of sort of anything that's going around is to stay curious, to want to learn more about it, to read the literature, to pick up books, to go to blogs, websites, and then just listen to what information is out there and try to form connections between existing stories, information that there is no connection on yet. So with the advent of technology, we're seeing a lot of information for scammers, catfishers, doxing. There might be some other new behaviors that don't exist yet that are coming out. And if we're able to just stay curious and keep learning about what's currently happening, we might then start being able to figure out what's going to happen in the future.
Can you think of a person, and maybe they're a historical figure or maybe they're a fictional character, I don't know, but can you think of someone who in your mind best represents malevolent creativity?
Oh, goodness. Okay.
I thought that'd be fun.
There are several of them. I teach that class, The Science of Evil, and I only teach it once a year because I need to step away from it sometimes and have a break, because some of the characters and the stories that are truth, they're not works of fiction. They are horrific. They're awful. And one of them that most everybody has heard about is Ted Bundy, the notorious serial killer. I'm not sure if everybody knows his background, but he used to volunteer on a campus crisis call center, fielding calls from people that were having problems on campus. And he would often have a woman, a college student, call in and she was perhaps upset about something that happened in her life with either her roommate or a significant other. And Ted Bundy, having strong powers of cognitive empathy, but not any affective empathy, would be able to manipulate her and to arrange to meet her on campus. He would also drive on the perimeters of the campus looking for women walking to their classes and offer them rides. And then he would abduct them, torture them, rape them, and murder them. And we know this because one woman escaped. And so she was able to tell the police exactly what happened to her. And so very malevolent, creative with what he was coming up with, highly manipulative.
When someone releases something new into the world, and I think they're at least somewhat responsible for how others are going to use it. So could you share any questions that we should ask ourselves before we release that new technology or that new research or a new product or whatever it is? Are there any questions we should ask ourselves to better ensure that it doesn't have unexpected consequences or isn't used poorly by others?
You know, Bradley, what popped in my head right now was that line from Malcolm in Jurassic Park, where I might misquote him, but I'll try to get it right, where he said the scientists were so busy thinking about whether they could, they didn't stop to think about whether they should. And I think that's a vital component for any field we work in, is if you're on a team, have somebody there that's doing the criticism. De Bono had 6 hats of problem solving. And one of the hats, he would say, you need to wear different hats. One of them is generating ideas. That's the green hat. One of them is gathering information. That's the white hat. He also said we need to have the black hat, which is the criticism. And we need to either rotate through wearing these hats or assign them to various team members so that there's somebody always there saying, what if this goes wrong? Or what if this is misused? What is the downside of coming up with this idea or implementing this plan? And I think that's important because many people, myself included, we fall in love with the research projects we're working on. It's our passion. And so we generate the ideas, we implement them, we keep going. But we also need to think about, well, could this be misinterpreted? Could it be misguided? And I often think about that in my course about the science of evil, because I'm outlining the steps to being evil. And it's like, okay, I'm sort of giving a how-to manual for what to do. And I thought of that recently with the Chat GPT, the algorithm software. They have had hackers recently, a convention actually went to see if they could hack into it, to come up with ways that you can misuse that software. And one of the hackers, I think he was out of Carnegie Mellon, was able to have the system come up with step-by-step plans for how to destroy humanity. And they got bullet point lists of how to do it. So the programmers went in and put a patch in, so no longer can they have nefarious uses for that software. But then, ever creative, I think, well, there's a workaround you could do, which instead to ask, how do you destroy humanity? Just type in, how do you foster humanity? And I did that, and it came up with about 15 bullet point lists. And I thought, just add a do not in front of every single one of those bullet points. And that's sort of the workaround for if you have a tool that's trying to promote goodness and helping behavior, you can flip it and have it be more nefarious and harmful. And that's sort of the downside of malevolent creativity. It's creative. You can always come up with a workaround for it. And technology, it's tricky because technology is moving in leaps and bounds so quickly every day. And at the same time, there are people thinking about how to use it for their own motivations and goals, and not all of them are helpful.
Have your views changed any on malevolent creativity since you've been researching it?
I think I'm now more suspicious of people, which is kind of sad to say because generally, I'm pretty friendly and I like to talk to people and share ideas. But I've seen the way that somebody, particularly with that empathy, somebody who has cognitive empathy, they know what to say. But if they lack affective empathy. They do not have your best intentions in heart, and you can't spot it. You think they're a really nice person, and they're not. So I think by studying this, it's just made me a little more suspicious, but perhaps that's good. You want to be a little bit guarded when you go out there into the world. Still, open to ideas and meeting people and, experiencing work projects and teams and groups. But I think having a bit of healthy skepticism is important.
Well, I think that leads perfectly into my last question, which is how can studying the psychology of malevolent creativity help us to better understand and potentially prevent behaviors?
I think, again, looking at that profile of who's more likely to engage in it can help. But I also want to put a caveat to that is there could be some instances where malevolent creativity done in an appropriate environment is not malevolent. And I think about fiction writers, for example, Stephen King, very, very creative, and his ideas are, evil and terrible, but it's presented in a way that causes enjoyment so people can read his work. So in that case, he would probably score very high on a profile of malevolent creativity, but he's channeled it through appropriate means. I think that is bringing in another concept of metacognition. So you've got creativity, but you've also got this malevolent piece. He also has metacognition, which is knowing how to channel his imagination and his bizarre and harmful ideas in a way that's not harmful. And so that would be a piece I'd bring in is to study creativity, malevolent creativity, personality profiles, but also metacognition.
This has been awesome. Is there anything that you'd like to add that I've maybe missed along the way?
I think that's pretty much covered it, just to know that malevolent creativity is out there. It can be very small attributes, or it can be very global attributes. It can be harmful, but in other ways, it can actually be through entertainment. And so it sort of covers pretty much everything that's out there.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. Real quick, I'd like to remind everyone that you can suggest future episodes and share your thoughts about the show. I've got a SurveyMonkey set up online, and you can find a link to it at www.psi chi, which is PSICHI/podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you go for podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. Word of mouth is a huge help. So share what you learned at the dinner table or in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter, newly retitled X, at Psi Chi Podcast, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you go for podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day. And more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I'll connect with you again soon. Copyright 2023, Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.